I believe that we serve a God who is more than able. We've seen it in our own lives, and I just want to say thanks to Pastor Steve and Karen for just the opportunity that we have to be here and share. Yesterday was awesome. We loved it. And I also, it's been a treat just to be able to also spend some time and catch up since college days. It's just incredible to be here. And even more than that is we sing about God being more than able because we've seen it in our lives. Grief to growth is not just something that we thought, hey, this will be cool. Being known as the grief guy is not like the coolest calling card. But we've seen God work in our own lives through our individual stories and journeys, but even together with our blended family and all of the things that we have going on. But I want Kari to just kind of set the stage of her story of how back in 2015, what happened that changed the course of your life?
Let me back up a little bit before that. When I was married to my husband, Eddie, for 20 years, almost 21 years, and we were high school sweethearts. We got married when we were 19. I was 19, he was 18, I have to say that. And so we got married and we set off. He was called into the ministry at 17, and so I didn't know exactly what that looked like when I was walking into that. I knew somewhat growing up in church, but not exactly what all that meant. And so we set out on this journey together, and 7 years later, we had 4 boys, and we were in the middle of ministry and life and chaos and sports and all the things. And then if I fast forward a little bit further, 2015, January 2015, we brought home number 5 right there in the middle. This was our first family picture together with the middle one. We adopted him in 2015, or we were in the middle of adopting him in 2015. And he was such a precious little boy that came into our home and into our lives. And they, at this time, were 6 to 18, 19 years old. In 2015. And so fast forward to November 22nd, 2015, Eddie was the children's pastor at our church, and we had 400 plus children that we were shepherding, and it was such a joy, and it was he just had such a passion for sharing the gospel with children and their families, and so we were in the middle of building a big children's building for our church, and he was so excited. And so that morning he was getting ready to speak, or he was speaking with our senior pastor, sharing the stage and kind of sharing the vision. We had just broke ground, and so it was this vision of what this was going to look like for children and their families. And so it was super exciting. He'd been waiting for this for about 7 years and just praying and planning, and it was finally coming to life. And so we were super excited, and that morning he spoke at the first of several services, and when he was done with that 8 o'clock service, he walked off the stage and he collapsed. And a little bit shortly after that, he passed away from a heart condition we didn't know he had. And so that, needless to say, turned our world upside down. This was not what we had planned. This was not part of our plan at all. And so we were just turned upside down. So later when we got home from the hospital, we were sitting on, I was sitting on my bed, and I just needed a minute to retreat. So I retreated to my room, and we had people coming over and helping and just kind of surrounding our family, whether that was church family or our family coming in and wanting to be around us and love on us. And we were so thankful for that. But I just needed a minute. It felt like a whirlwind. I felt like I had just gotten hit over the head, and I felt like I needed a minute to just catch my breath and figure out what was happening, and was this real? And so I sat there for a few minutes, and I just really wanted to just turn around and crawl back in bed and lay on his pillow, smell his scent, and never come out. And I couldn't, because I could hear those boys out there, and I knew that they needed me. And I knew that wasn't what God was wanting me to do. But I needed a moment. And so I sat there, and as I was sitting there, I was just like, okay, God, I have no idea what you're doing. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm so scared. I've never been alone. I went straight from my home and made a home of our own. And so I didn't know what that was going to be like. And I just really felt a lot of fear. And so I was sitting there, and I looked up, and on the dresser was Eddie's stuff from that morning, his Bible and his iPad. And he used his Bible to read scripture. And when he would speak or talk to the kids, he would have this specific Bible that he would bend. It was crazy. He would just bend it up and use it, and it was just what he used, and they all knew that. But I wanted to open his iPad because I wanted to read his words. I wanted to be able to hear his voice. As I was reading, as I would read, I would think, okay, I could just hear him one more time. Because I wasn't there that morning. I didn't see him. I was still in bed when he left that morning. And so I never saw him. 2 of our boys did, because they were there early, because it was a children's service that they had incorporated. And so they were able to see him and talk with him. And so I felt a little gypped. I didn't get to say goodbye. I didn't even get to see him that morning. And so I just felt like I needed to just look at it and open it up. And I opened it up thinking I was going to read his words. And when I opened it up, sorry, I have a password on it. When I opened it up, this is what hold on, it's not working. I opened it up and I saw, it's still not working, sorry. When I opened it up, I thought I was going to see his words and read them, and instead there was the Bible app. And in the Bible app there was a highlighted verse, and it was just highlighted, and I thought, well, that's interesting, because he normally uses his, and it wasn't a verse that I knew that was in his sermon, because I had all week long had heard, for the last few weeks, had heard what he was going to talk about and all of that. And so it was really interesting, but I knew it was God, because it said, it was 1 Peter 5:10, and it said, and the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast. And I just started crying. And I didn't really know what to do with that at first, until I sat there and I said, okay, God, I surrender. What am I supposed to do? And I reread the verse, and I said, okay. He was giving me permission to grieve. He said, Kari, I'm right here. Don't forget that. After you have suffered a little while. He didn't give me a timetable. He didn't say it's going to be 30 days. He didn't say it. And so he just knew that was whatever my timetable was for him. He was going to restore me. He was going to make me strong, firm, and steadfast. And I could take that, and I knew that he hadn't left me. He hadn't left my boys. He hadn't left us. He hadn't turned our family upside down. He was right there next to us.
You know, when we think about that sometimes we want God to speak to us and talk to us, but we want him to do it in our way. And for my story, it was just a few months earlier than that. Actually, it was in 2014, the year prior. My wife, Mary Beth, and my two daughters, we were serving as worship pastors in Orlando, Florida, and moved to Fresno and everybody like cocks their head and they're like, "You did what?" So we moved to be worship pastors. Going to be the worship pastor in Fresno, and just shortly, a few months after we moved in across country, we had been in the middle of adjusting to everything and the new community, new church, everything different, and we noticed a change in my wife's health. And went to the doctor. They did a biopsy, and it was on December 23rd, about 4 hours before sound checks for our first production there at the new church. We found out that those dreaded words of "you have cancer." And she was diagnosed with a rare, aggressive form of breast cancer, triple negative, and we went into treatment, and we just started talking about what God, what do we do with this? We had to go home and tell our girls. We had to just let them know, hey, we don't know what this looks like, but we're trusting that God's going to be with us. And there was a scripture that Mary Beth had shared, and she said, "This is what I'm holding on to," and it's in Psalm 112:7, and it says, "They do not fear bad news, but they confidently trust the Lord to care for them." And it was like every doctor appointment we were going to, every week, it was like we were getting more bad news. And we just said, we're going to confidently trust. I love those words, that they trust the Lord. No, they confidently trust the Lord. Sometimes when we have things come against us, we're like, "God, where are you at?" And we look at it and say, well, if things are coming against me, then God, where are you? Have you abandoned me? When he's saying in 1 Peter, after you've suffered, that there will be some suffering. And then we have this of, they don't fear bad news, but they confidently trust the Lord to care. So even when we're going through the situation, we can continue to trust God. And so we did. And through that first part of 2015, she went through all of her treatments and chemo, and we were believing, just saying, okay, we finished chemo, and we're moving to the next thing, and this is going to be great. And when she finished chemo, we realized that things weren't responding the way that we thought, and went back to the doctor, and they found that the cancer had actually spread. And from that point, when we went back to the doctor, it was 7 days later that she passed away. And there was a time when I was out in the back patio, and I was just staring off. And my daughter came out, and she was like, "Dad, what is going on? Is this a joke? Like, is God messing with us? Like, we've been praying this whole time." I tell you what, it's one thing for you to stand on and trust the Word of God, and then when you get hit, when your kids are saying, "Hey, Pastor, Dad, we've been praying about this and what's going on. How do we know that God's going to care for us? But I'd seen it in my own life and how God had, through different losses and things that I walked through. I said, all I can know is I've seen God do this in my life. And I know He's not going to leave us. And through that time, then it was, so that was just a few months before Eddie had passed away. We didn't know. We were serving in churches across town, and it was less than a year that we had been in Fresno. And so then the following year, we were seeing the same counselor. And so we knew of each other's story because Fresno's kind of a big little city. I mean, it's like everybody knows your business. And but it was things that, you know, Eddie's story on that day, I remember seeing it on the evening news, and it was a very public in both of our situations. And so we were talking one day with after I was done with the counselor, and he was like, hey, have you met Kari yet? And I'm like, no. And he goes, well, you are in about 30 seconds because she's coming in. She's the next appointment. And we met and just kind of started talking about the craziness of our lives and the bizarre nature and navigating that time of loss. And then how do you navigate that with not only kids, but we were navigating that loss in front of a ton of people, each of us in our churches. And so it was... In 2 years later, in 2017, we got married, and it's crazy. These were the last family photos that we had of each of our families taken. I'm not sure what the thing was with the plaid, but we were all matching. Ours was in Orlando, Florida, that we had ours taken. Looks like the photographer just moved the camera and just moved the lens, but we promise you that was not the case. And then Kari and Eddie, their family in Fresno. But this was on our wedding day, and so we see that, and that was an incredible day of a lot of tears and a lot of gratitude for what God had done. And one of my friends came out from Florida to sing, and I told him, I said, one of the songs that I want you to sing is a song that he had written, and it's called You Will Restore. And even thinking about those times and going back to this scripture that God will restore. Well, now our family looks a little bit different since that time. We have 4 of our kids are married. We just had our 7th grandbaby. And so it is a crazy time when we have family night and we get together. So we don't always get to be together because we have one that lives in Florida. We have another that lives in Tuscaloosa, and
one in Nashville now.
And now one in Nashville.
2 weeks.
And so when we look at these things in our lives, it's looking at and saying, how do we find the beauty in the brokenness? And so, you know, we know that God is there for us, but we also know that there is pain in our lives that we each face. And so how do we find purpose in our pain? Because so many times when we face pain, when we face loss, and let me just let you know this, grief is not a term that is synonymous with death. You know, we look at it and we say, well, I'm not grieving because nobody's died, so it can't be that. You know, there was a survey and a study done by the Grief Recovery Institute just in the past few years, and they surveyed like 9,000 counseling centers. And they were asking different things about mental health, and they were talking about things that we face in our society and all of that. And the counselors that responded to this said the overwhelming majority, like overwhelming issue that we face with mental health in our culture and society is not because of this, that, the other, and all of these things that are there. The number one issue is unresolved grief. Things that have turned into, I didn't know how to process when my dad died, and so I figured I would make the pain stop on my own, which led to addictions, substance abuse, of just saying, if I can just not feel today, I'm going to be better off. We look at it of anger, of saying, I don't know. There was a young man that was going through one of our classes, and I was asking him, I said, man, what, is this class helping you? How is this process going? And he said, yeah. He said, I have lived my life being angry. He said, I came here because my mom died, and I didn't know how to deal with the pain. I have 3 sisters, and we were going to go and pick out a casket. We were going to go and choose all of these things. And he said, I froze up. And my sisters are looking at me like I'm just this complete waste because I didn't give any input. He goes, I didn't even know what to do. I just was stuck. And he said, I've lived my life being angry. I've gotten kicked out of school. I've lost jobs because of my anger, and I'm tired of just being angry. There's another guy who is now an adult, father of, has a few kids, and his brother had passed away. And he said, I was dealing with the anger of my brother dying. And at first it was like, I need to let this go and deal with it. But then I was like, nah, not today. And then it would come up again. Are you going to deal with it? Not today. The days turned into weeks, that turned into months, that turned into 9 years of just being angry. He said, I got to the point that I just had to let go of being angry, because by not dealing with my emotions, I shut down everything and all feeling for the last 9 years that I won't get back. I wasn't able to be present in my marriage. I wasn't able to be present in my kids' lives. And I wanted everybody to see the world the way I did. And so we looked at all of these areas. The number one issue facing our mental health in society is unresolved grief. How have you processed losses? Maybe you look at it and you go, well, I never pictured that I could be grieving that now we are empty nesters. People that have retired, that have worked all their life going, man, I'm working toward this. You hit it, the mark. You achieved your goal and realized you didn't have another goal past that. And now are looking for what your identity is. And we look at all of these things going and saying, oh, wait a second. So in our lives, we look at this, and how do we find purpose in our pain? Every one of us face issues of grief, of loss, things that didn't look the way that we anticipated they would. So the first thing that we know is that pain is real, but it's not permanent. There is pain in our lives. We have suffering in our lives, things that don't work out. But Psalm 30, verse 5, it says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Pain is not a sign of weakness. When we look at all of these areas in our lives that we're not grieving because we're weak, it's evidence that we've loved, we've lost, and we've lived deeply. Peter said, after you've suffered a little while. So even though it feels like this is an endless time, the object of grief and how do you move from grief to growth is not by, man, I get a badge or a trophy by how fast I went through this process. There is no timeline on this. But you walk through this of just saying, hey, God, I'm going to trust you today. And it's all about taking one step. You know, I looked at our lives even when we were dating, and I was like scared going, I got 2 girls, like how do I, 5 boys? Like how do we do this? How do we have the capacity for 7 kids? Like forget the providing financially. It's just like how do we navigate all of these things? I just bought a house a year before. And then like what do we do? I started getting overwhelmed, and it was the picture, and I shared this over the weekend, the picture of when I was in our high school youth group back in Collinsville, Illinois, and we would have these Friday nights that we would do scavenger hunts. And you would go out, and we would typically start at Woodman Park, and then you go, and under pavilion number 5, you're going to find your first clue, and then you get that, and then you go to the next. So many times we want to shortcut the pain because we just think, you know, well, I'm just over this. Or here's another challenge. When we want to shortcut other people's pain because we're done hearing about their challenges. And so many times we can, if we're not closed off, we can start closing off other people, and sooner or later, we isolate ourselves one way or another. Because we don't want to be patient through the process, we want to get it done. Okay, well, if you're a type A person, and you're like, I need this, 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 and this, and if it's not done in the way that I need it, it's not going to work. But what happens when we start looking at that and we start shutting down our emotions, trying to get from A to Z? We do it for ourselves and just go, okay, I'm going to pretend this didn't exist. Now for other people, I'm going to pretend it doesn't exist for you too. It's time. We had somebody that they came to us, and we were setting up for a class one night, and a lady walked in, and she was like, you know, well, I've got a neighbor, and it was like 2 months ago, her husband died, and she just needs to get out of the house. She needs to do, and I think she needs to come to this, and she needs to do this. It's time. She's got to get over this. And I'm like, Kari first saw me because it was like, Matt, keep your mouth shut. You're Pastor Matt. You can't. And I'm like, I'm glad I'm not your neighbor. That how do we navigate? Pain is real, but it's not permanent. But that permanence is not on your timetable either. And so we have to trust God. We have to acknowledge that God is our anchor, that this won't last forever, but He is our anchor. The second thing is God can restore what grief has stripped away. But let me tell you this, because we look at it and go, well, okay, well, how does God restore that? I mean, your wife died. Her husband died. How does God? Restoration doesn't mean the same as replacement. Restoration means that God will take the things in your life, the brokenness, all of these aspects, and He will restore those things, but it may not look the way you thought. But God, I thought I would still be doing this or that. God, I never pictured that we might have a ministry to help people that are walking through grief. But God can take that and say, I know it's not the way you thought, but I can still use your brokenness. So God can restore. Joel 2:25, I will restore to you the years that the swarming locust has eaten. Grief often can leave us feeling empty, stripped of joy, relationships, or even your identity. But we serve a God who is a God of restoration, and He can bring beauty from ashes. And then this third part is purpose is birthed through brokenness. 2 Corinthians 1, 3 and 4, the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. Our greatest ministry can sometimes flow from the greatest pain that we faced in our lives, because you have this level of empathy that you start seeing people, instead of being all churchy and judgy, we start realizing that, oh, wait, now this has impacted my family too. I guess I won't judge like that anymore. We start looking at it and saying, God, give us a heart of compassion that I can have empathy for others who have experienced brokenness. Because once you experience it, it's easy to spot it in other people. And how the gift of your presence, of just showing up in somebody's life, that God can use you in ways you never thought. But I don't know the words to say. Then don't say anything. Keep your mouth shut and just be there. Kari had talked about that with some friends that she had that would just come and they would just sit at the house, not saying anything, just being there and being present. So we look at it that our pain is real, but it's not permanent. God can restore, and purpose can be birthed through brokenness. We do this project in these classes of Grief to Growth, and this is one that we have done a number of times, and it's called a kintsugi project, and it's from a Japanese artistry where they take broken pieces and they put them back together. And we have people that have walked through this journey and kind of identified what their losses are and different things that they've had to work through. And then we have them break this vase, and then they glue it back together. And then on the last week, they're painting the gold in those spaces and the cracks. And this is one of the projects that we did. And I want you to just look at that, because we have a habit of walking into church trying to make sure that people can't see any cracks in our lives. We smile. We're going to be the first one to say, hey, Pastor, I'll help with that. But we don't want to let any of the cracks or the issues that show in our lives, we don't want anybody else to see our pain and think that, well, I'm a weak person. What if we started living our lives that our flaws, our scars, our brokenness doesn't have to be hidden, but God can use that to add depth and dimension to your life, that's saying, after you have suffered a little while, I will restore you. But God, I want to be perfect. Nope, there's only one. And He is our restorer, not the replacer. He is the restorer. That today you might look at this and say, you know what? I have flaws, I have issues, I have all of these things. Matt, you don't know my loss, you don't know my pain, and I would say you are exactly right. This isn't about comparing losses, and we have this Richter scale of going, whoa, man, you get the trophy. This is about saying, I'm broken, I'm dealing with this. That's what this church is for. To reach a broken community and show them the love and restoration of Jesus Christ. That's why we're here tonight. That's why we're here tonight, to pray and say, God can help you through this, and God can work. And we want sometimes grief to just go, God, just do it, and I don't have to grieve anymore. And that would be awesome. But there's some steps that we still have to take of saying, God, I'm going to give my brokenness to you. And I'm going to accept the fact that this may not look the way that I thought. There might be some cracks. There might even be some holes left where something doesn't fit in those parts. But God, today I'm asking you to fill it. That today, God is in the middle of your story. And you might look at it and say, I don't know, I can't see the answer right now. I'm just telling you to hold on and trust God. Today across this room, I want you to know that we all experience this suffering, but your pain is not permanent. Today in this, you see this and you're like, what in the world is this? This is what we did yesterday. And we started talking about emotions, and then we were layering of just, people were talking about, well, what are some of the emotions and feelings? Well, anger, frustration, resentment, guilt, all of these things. And we would take just different colors and would pour this in. And then it went on and we talked about the dangers of repressing our emotions. But then when we begin to let up, and so we had each of these on. And for the control freaks that are like, I don't want to let go, they want certain colors in different parts of going, this is how I'm going to do this. And all the control freaks are in their head going, don't respond to where people can tell that you're a control freak. But when we look at this, the ability that we have, we can't control that the pain is going to run, that the emotions are going to run. But the ability that we have is that we can tilt the canvas, that we can just say, God, I want you to take this and all of the mess, all of the drips, all of the issues, and I want you to take that. And what ends up happening is, as we just let this run, that we realize that even in the mess, God is creating a masterpiece in your life. It may not look the way you intended, but God is going to bring out even other areas in your life and dimensions and abilities that you have to minister through your brokenness that you never thought possible.